Hello and welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk to real lawyers about their lives in and out of the practice of law, how they got to be lawyers, and what their experience has been. I'm Louis Goodman, the host of the show, and yes, I'm a lawyer. Nobody's perfect. He founded a full-service boutique immigration law firm that helps individuals and businesses with relocation to Canada. He assists biotech, tech, and healthcare companies bring skilled workers into Canada. He is based in Toronto. He deals with family reunification issues, refugee claims, and humanitarian applications. Hart Kaminker, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on today.
Well, it's a privilege to have you on. I was very interested in talking to you, in large part because of the work that you do in terms of immigration law in Canada. I have a practice that does criminal defense in Alameda County, California, and I have been amazed at the number of my clients who want to know what the consequences are as far as their ability to travel to Canada as a result of criminal consequences. So I thought that you would be a very interesting person to talk to. Can you tell us a little bit about where your office is located and what your practice involves right now?
Okay, so my office is located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And, as far as the city is concerned, we're sort of not downtown, I guess we're midtown. And our practice really covers all aspects of immigration. So we do what might be known as the litigation side. So, asylum claims, refugee claims, appealing deportation order, helping people who have been refused entry into Canada, whose applications have been refused. And we also do the processing side, which would be, helping skilled people coming to Canada. It may also be helping businesses bring workers to Canada. And it could also be helping individuals who have a past criminal record who need to go through the process that needs to be gone through in order to be able to enter Canada. So it really it covers a very broad, it covers all aspects of immigration law. And also we do citizenship as well.
I'm always very interested in where people grew up, where they went to school. So where are you from?
Born and bred in Toronto. So this is where I've lived my whole life, and as has my family as well.
Did you go to school there and to college there?
So I went to school I did my undergrad in the University of Western Ontario. That's in a city called London, Ontario, which is about halfway between Toronto and Detroit, the U.S. border between Ontario and Michigan. And then I did my law school at the University of Toronto in Toronto.
Well, I'm very familiar with the area because I went to the University of Rochester, which, of course, is right across Lake Ontario from the Toronto area.
That's right.
And it gets cold in Rochester and Toronto.
It does. It gets very cold. I don't think we have, because Toronto itself is not in the snow belt, so I'm not sure we get as much snow as Rochester does. But it does get cold here in the winter. And it does snow.
So what was the experience like for you going to law school?
I think for me it was, I really liked it and I excelled at it. The whole idea about case law and arguing and, trying to come to a conclusion, when an issue was presented to yourself was very interesting to me. So I really enjoyed it.
When did you start thinking about being a lawyer?
So I would say it would be halfway through undergrad that, I started to prepare to write the LSAT and apply to law school.
So what did your friends and family think and say when you told them you wanted to be a lawyer?
My family was happy. My father was a physician, so he was in a profession, and I think my parents were happy that I chose a profession as well. I think my friends also, because, many of the people that I went to high school with in undergrad, not all, but a lot took sort of the same track, going to professional school, whether that was medicine or dentistry or law. So we all took a similar track. We had that in common.
I'm a little bit curious about this. In Canada, do you have a similar law setup to the one we have in the United States, or is it more like England with solicitors and barristers?
Okay, so it's a good question. So in Canada, it's a fused profession. So when you get called to the bar, you're both a barrister and solicitor. It's not separate here.
What do you really like about practicing law?
I like the interaction with the people. I really like that. And I think also, again, immigration's an area of law where I think you get a good satisfaction in the work that you do, that a positive result often has most of the time has a significant effect on the individual's life. So that's very satisfying when you can get that done for them.
Well, speaking of getting work done for clients, can we talk a little bit about what sort of considerations one should have if you're thinking about going to Canada to live? And the reason I ask that is it is amazing how many people I know in the United States, especially recently, who have said, I want to go live in Canada.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, and we need not get into it, but there is an enormous interest, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but there's an enormous interest of people in the United States, even people in places that are considered really, quite good to live in, like Northern California, who want to go to Canada. So what considerations should people have about that?
Well, I think they have to, I guess the prime consideration is do they have a pathway into Canada? I mean, and it really, and the answer to that question would depend upon a lot of factors. So it may depend upon age, it may depend upon your education, and it certainly may depend upon your education plus the work that you do under the free trade agreement between Canada and the United States. For some occupations, it's relatively, using the word relatively, easier to get into Canada to work if you have an offer of employment here, and then that offer of employment can be used as a bridge ultimately to permanent residence. So I think there would be a whole host of factors that you would take a look at as to whether that was viable. I think as well, ultimately, that's sort of the practical side. Do I qualify, to ultimately be accepted as a permanent resident in Canada? And I guess the other side is really about, living in Canada. Obviously, as we've discussed earlier, it's a little colder than most places, not all places in the United States, but many. Certainly, if you're coming from California, it would be colder than in California. And I think as well, just sort of the culture, I think, is different in Canada. I mean, certainly there's a lot of commonalities between the U.S. and Canada, but I think the culture, the way of life, is somewhat different, and, whether that's something that you can adapt to.
Can you be specific about that?
Well, I think we're a little, I think we're a little more, we're a little bit more left than the United States. So I think our politics are a little more left. I mean, not like way out left, but I think more left of the United States. So, for example, there is universal health care in Canada. That would be, I guess, one example. And I think just generally more government programs, I guess, that are universally available across the provinces. So I think that would be one thing that's a little bit different. Obviously, our gun laws are stricter than in the United States. So those would be a couple of the examples where I think you'd see differences here as compared to the U.S. I mean, certainly our large cities, but I think this isn't different in the U.S. I mean, our large cities in Toronto would be a prime example of it, are very multicultural. So Toronto is a very cosmopolitan city, with people from almost every corner of the world, which makes it a very interesting place to live, in my view. And that's certainly been a big change, since when I was, younger, like not even in high school, I would say, in grade school, it wasn't a very multicultural place. And certainly as I progressed through high school and university, that changed a lot. But I think positively, I think it's a positive for the city and for the country. So
obviously a lot of people are emigrating from Canada from all over the world. And what does Canada look for in terms of allowing people in?
So I think what they're looking for are matching people to the labor needs in Canada. I mean, labor needs over the last half year or so, or since the pandemic, and certainly, I guess over the last half year has, become an acute problem here as it is in the United States. but they look for people that they need. So that's one thing. So the provinces have their own immigration programs, which are directed specifically towards the particular occupation or labor needs that are required in the province. I think more broadly, they're looking at people who, based upon their education, their ability in English and or French, their age, work experience, they're looking for, people who they believe can integrate well into the community and ultimately contribute economically.
In the United States, there seems to be an emphasis on allowing family members of people who are already here to come into the United States as immigrants. Is there that same consideration in Canada, or is Canada somewhat more Canadian needs driven?
So no, there is a family reunification program. So in Canada, you can, if you marry a spouse who's a foreigner, you absolutely can sponsor them. There is a program to sponsor parents and grandparents. There is no reunification for siblings, which I think might be different in the United States. But there is, as I mentioned just now, there definitely is a family reunification program that covers spouses, parents, and grandparents. And there are some other sort of limited cases. So, a sibling that's orphaned who is a minor, that would also fall into a family reunification. And I guess the other would be if you're here and you have no person that you can sponsor, so no spouse, no mother, father, grandparent, then you can sponsor a relative to come join you here in Canada. So the answer to the question is yes, there is family reunification in Canada as well.
What's the deal with Americans with driving under the influence charges? And why is that such a big thing as far as Canada is concerned?
Okay, so it's a big thing because if you've got a driving under the influence charge, then you would be not admissible to Canada based upon that criminal record. And so, yes, you're quite correct. That's probably one of the most common criminal charges that will keep people out of Canada.
Even as a tourist?
Even as a tourist, yes. You are inadmissible to Canada. That's correct. And then there are ways to remedy that.
Like what?
After 5 years. 5 years after the end of the sentence. So that, if you had a probationary period, it would be counting 5 years from the end of the probationary period. So it's something called criminal rehabilitation. I like to describe it to clients sort of as like an immigration pardon.
What about other sorts of minor criminal convictions? Let's say a misdemeanor domestic violence or a misdemeanor theft offense or a misdemeanor possession of marijuana offense?
So, yes. So again, it really depends on, basically what I will tell clients is pretty much you basically don't want to have a criminal record coming to Canada. Some of these issues might be easier to solve than others, but any kind of criminal record can be problematic.
If an American does go and live and work in Canada, does that require giving up American citizenship?
If you're a permanent resident, obviously you maintain your U.S. citizenship because you're just a permanent resident of Canada. You're not a citizen. But if you chose to become a citizen of Canada at some point in the future, Canada does not require you to, at least as the law stands now, allows you to hold more than one citizenship.
So that means that you could vote in elections in Canada and in the United States?
That's correct.
And could you root for the Maple Leafs and the Rangers?
I guess you could.
Seems a bit more problematic.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more problematic. I guess you could.
If someone were coming out of college and they were thinking about going into law, would you recommend that as a career move to a young person?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think you really have to like it. I think it's something that you have to think long and hard about whether this is what you want to devote your working life to. I mean, as you and I know, but like many people go to law school and don't ultimately end up practicing law. And, there might be value in the education beyond practicing law. But I think, it takes a lot of dedication and it can take a lot of hours to do it well. So I think you have to be prepared to make that commitment. I think if you are, then as I said earlier, I think it can be, a very rewarding profession, in helping people ultimately achieve their goals.
How is actually practicing law met or different from your expectations about it?
You have you have your bad days, like in any profession. But I think, it certainly met my expectations, I think, from, being rewarding and like feeling like I'm doing something good, I guess, ultimately for people. And that I think is very satisfying.
How about the business of practicing law? How's that gone for you, and how's that either met or different from your expectations about it?
Yeah. So I think that's probably been the more challenging part for me personally. I really do enjoy the practice of law, and I enjoy advocating for people, whether that's on paper or whether that's vocally. The business side is something probably that I don't think I'm as good at, and I think likely because it's not something that it's not something that I like as much as actually doing the practice of law.
Is there anything that you know now that you really wished you had known before you started practicing law?
So that's a good question. I think, I think one, part of it, I think, is really the absolute sort of dedication or the concentration, I think, that it takes to really get to get to a good result in many cases. It can be a lot of hours at times, and that is something that can be draining, I guess. But ultimately, as I said, I think if you take a look at the overall picture, very satisfactory.
Your legal system in Canada is obviously a little different than the one that we have here in the United States. But looking at your legal system, looking at the Canadian legal system, do you think it's fair?
I think this is something that probably cuts across anybody that does litigation. But if you're looking at fairness, a lot, especially on asylum claims, a lot depends on the adjudicator that you appear in front of, and that can be frustrating.
I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, Hart. What is your family life like, and how has practicing law affected that?
Well, it's a good question. My profession has affected my family life because of the hours that it takes at times. So, I certainly have. I certainly work long hours, which I think, it was difficult for my spouse, for my wife at times, and certainly when the kids were younger. So I think, it's definitely impacted in that way. But my wife has been, very supportive of me and my career and my profession. So I've been very fortunate in that way. It has been sort of my anchor, when the seas get rough, which I'm very fortunate for. I mean, extremely fortunate.
Have you had any interesting travel experience?
So I have traveled, for work purposes. So I've been to China, been to India several times. I've been to Pakistan once many years ago. Where else? And I've been to some parts of Eastern Europe. So yeah, I've had some. Certainly India has was an eye opener for me, but I got used to it after a few trips there, and met a lot of interesting people along the way. So and certainly seeing a different culture and completely, to a certain extent, completely different way of life. I've also been in the Gulf area, like in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So that's also was interesting, and, meeting people from all different walks of life.
How about in Canada? Any places that an American should make a point of seeing?
Well, being born and bred in Toronto, I mean, I think Toronto's a great city, and lots to do here, lots of really interesting neighborhoods and places to wander around. So that means you should come in the summer. I think I think also Montreal is also a great city. It's much different than Toronto, a lot more European than Toronto, so it gives you a different experience. So I'm sure lots of people on the West Coast have been up to Vancouver, and if they're skiers, up to Whistler and other places like that.
What sort of recreational pursuits do you enjoy to kind of clear your head when you're not practicing law?
So I like to play tennis. That's, which unfortunately during the pandemic was curtailed somewhat, but I'm hoping to get back into it very shortly. So that would be probably that. And, I do go to the gym and work out, try to get there a couple of days a week. So those would be the kinds of things. And then we my wife and I like walking. So Toronto has a lot of ravines that run through the city. So there are a lot of trails for these ravines, which we like to do, usually in the spring and in the fall when it's a little bit cooler, sometimes in the summer, but Toronto does get hot in the summer. So, the distance that you can go is a little less. So those are the kinds of things that I like to do. But I think tennis, I really enjoy that. It's great exercise, and just also the social aspect of it.
Yeah, Margaret Atwood once said, "Toronto has two seasons: too hot and too cold."
I think that's very accurate. Yes.
I wouldn't want to argue with her. What sort of things keep you up at night?
So I think files that sometimes keep me up at night, like whether we've taken the right strategy on a file, especially ones that may I think certain files would keep you up at night. And I think certainly the running of the office, can keep you up at night. So, making sure that everything's running smoothly, that the lights are going to stay turned on, people are going to be able to come into work. And those are the kinds of things that keep you up at night. I think, so if you're taking a look at the pandemic, when it struck it in March of 2020, I mean, those things really became very bright. And certainly kept me up at night, through those months when things were, and certainly in the early part when things were, at least in Toronto, were shut pretty tight.
Let's say you came into some real money, 3 or 4 billion Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
I would certainly still continue to practice law. It will be 30 years since I started to practice law. So I'm on the other, the second half of my career. So I would say that if I had the opportunity, to maybe slow down a little bit earlier than I planned, although that's certainly in the plans at some point in the future, that I would do that. But I certainly wouldn't, close up shop. I wouldn't do that because, I like doing this. I like the intellectual challenge, and I need the intellectual challenge. And I'm kind of the person that, when I've been away for 2 weeks, that's enough. I need to get home. I need to get back. I need to get back to the office, for that. I can only relax so much, maybe is the way to put it. But I think what I would do is probably accelerate that plan and, obviously, $3 or $4 billion, give money to people who need it, more than I do.
Let's say you had a magic wand. There was one thing that you could change in the world, in the legal world, or just the world in general. What one thing would you want to change?
So maybe this, the one thing, if we're talking about the world today, I think the one thing that I would change is I think that there has to be more civility in the world. And I think even in the practice, I think that's creeped in to a certain extent in the practice of law. I'm not sure what your experience has been, but definitely less civil. We're not always going to agree, but we can agree to disagree. And I think that's, but I would think more civility. I mean, I think that needs, that it would be nice if we sort of go back to the time when there was more civility in people's interpersonal discussions.
Do you think that's driven by social media?
I think so.
In the United States right now, I don't think that it's any sort of a reach to say that our social and political worlds are very polarized, and we are really a very divided nation in a way that, I certainly have never seen before in this country. Is Canada going through something like that too, or is it more unified about things?
I would say it's more unified. I mean, I wouldn't say that doesn't exist in Canada at all. I think it does to a much more limited extent. So I think Canadians, more unified. I think they tend to be a little more, how shall I put it there, a little bit more centrist. And I think that because of that, you don't see you don't see the extent of the divisions that you might be seeing in the United States.
Okay, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we have not discussed?
No, I think that was, I think we've covered a broad range of topics and very interesting speaking to you.
Hart, if someone wants to get in touch with you, if they have questions about Canadian immigration issues, what's the best way to do that? Do you have a website that you could give us so I can put in the show notes so that people can get in touch?
Yeah, we do have a website, and that's the best way. there's a general email as well as my own personal email under my profile on the website that you can contact me. And the website's kaminkerlaw.com.
And that's KAMINKER law, all one word, .com?
Exactly.
Very well. Hart Kaminker, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. I have enjoyed our conversation. I've learned a few things.
And it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I thank you very much for having me on.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and subscribe to the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. I promise I'll respond. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks as always to my guests who share their wisdom, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman. Hang on just a second, Hart. I'm experiencing a little bit of technical error here for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on. Hold on a minute. Okay, well, now you know why we record this in two separate places.
Right.
Well, that's never happened before, but, it's first time for everything.